Is that a fake hat or a real hat? Is that AI hat?
Of course, it's a real hat. What are you talking? It's a real hat. What are you talking about? Look,
I had a
jingle
haircut. I had a
bells.
haircut. I chopped my hair off. Look, it's short again. So there
You
you
do
go.
look very, very, very dapper, very handsome, very aerodynamic. Are you all set for Christmas? You bought your tree, you shot
got
the
the tree.
goose.
Got the
My
tree.
wife was done in August. But
Well, he's got a plant.
He's dragged in the point, the Christmas plant, the poinsettia, the only plant you get at Christmas, and then they die. They die in January. Are the dads running to the petrol station on Christmas Eve for our wives?
Last minute prime shopping. Yeah.
There's always last minute
Turkey
something,
ordered.
isn't there?
Got the turkey ordered.
Yeah, my wife is so organised. As soon as the school holidays were, the end of the school holidays, she was on it. Yeah, she's a Halloween and a Christmas machine. She loves it. Well, should we crack on? What do you reckon?
Let's do it.
Hello and welcome to Upside. It's a Christmas special today where we are not unpacking the news of the week and looking behind the headlines. We're looking at all of 25, all of the moves and the shakes, everything that's happened this year that we think is going to be meaningful for European tech. And we have a lovely full house. You've got Andrew, Lomax, Mads and myself. And Lomax, I know you've done some behind the scenes digging. Please give us the 25 big picture as it's happened so far.
Okay, so capital into European startups this year is probably going to end the year at $45 billion. So for context, this is still about half what it was in 2021, which was $100 billion. I know. But it's actually weirdly, despite all the good news and everything, it's actually quite consistent with the last two years, 23 and 24.
But everyone has seen the charts, haven't they? Everyone has seen that kind of the pimple of 21, 22. And in Europe, everything dying 24,
Everything
25.
Everything died. Things came back. And things have come back, but they're not growing as fast as you might think in terms of capital into startups. Unicorn creation, on the other hand, has quietly accelerated. So Europe minted 28 new unicorns in 2025, up from 14 in 24. So we've kind of doubled on the unicorn count, which is good. And as we've all seen, and Lovable today has announced yet another big fundraise at $6.6 billion valuation. Lovable 11 Labs meaningfully gone from 0 to hundreds of million in revenue in very short order. So that's obviously great. Not to be too much of a downer on Europe, though, is actually 2025 has been a bit of a year of US exceptionalism, and they will land roughly at 250 billion of private tech investment. So that really, compared to Europe's 45, that really is a big, big difference. The US now accounts for around 2/3 of all global private tech funding. I guess that's not unsurprising. And we've seen the big model companies raising large amounts of money. And I mentioned 45 billion into the European ecosystem. Remember that OpenAI had one round raised 40 billion. So the numbers, the gap is kind of widening. One area where it's been hard in the US and in Europe has been fundraising for us, for VCs. That really, really is still very, very constrained. Europe will probably only end up raising around 10 billion into funds this year, which is actually down from last year. So LPs remain very cautious. And I think that's driven by lags in exit activity that we've seen in the last couple of years. The good news is, and I'll end on some good news, is that exit activity has picked up a bit this year. And so then that might see more LP dollars kind of get released and come back into the system next year and the year after. Obviously, we've had big marquee exits this year, including the Wiz, M&A, acquisition by Google earlier in Q1. On the European side, we've had the IPOs of Klarna and SMG, Swiss Marketplace Group, which was an IPO we haven't talked about on the pod, is one of the bigger IPOs, top 10 IPOs of the year. So exits have started to pick up again, which I think will start to push more money back in at the top of the funnel. That's the roundup of the ecosystem for 25.
So I want to do predictions. We're going to do that on the 2nd of Jan. So I don't want any of us to slide into predictions on what we think for next year. But Andrew, you had some questions.
So I thought we should kick off by how would you describe the year in one sentence related to how was 2025 for tech and everything we waffle on about on this podcast?
Who wants to start that? For me, it's just volatility. It feels like it's been an exaggerated world of volatility. Everything has been to the extreme. That's where I went. Lomax?
2025 is the final nail in the coffin of globalisation for me.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to dig into some geopolitics. But Mads, what would be your word or phrase of the year?
I would say that it's the year China became the peer of the US.
Oh, bold.
I think we're going to We're going to unpack that as well. But I think when you look at what's happening in automotive and AI in so many fields, it's clear that we are no longer, certainly not a unipolar world. And actually, we have two rival powers that both are very strong. And probably where neither can beat the other, even if they wanted to.
Yeah, the new world order has shifted. Andrew, what would your answer be to your own question?
Well, I think this is, it turns out, the most powerful weapon system this year was shipped faster, particularly in places like Ukraine. Things that were gold plated were less important than things that you can order online. I think that's that's going to be true I think it's true across AI, and it's true across defending ourselves and 10,000 drones a month being deployed on the front line.
Yeah, I was reading a few weeks ago about the Ukrainian drone tech. What was your next question, Andrew? Bring it on, baby.
What's the single most exciting thing that happened in tech for you this year?
Mads, what was the most exciting thing in tech for you?
Well, I've got three for you. Top of my list is...
Far away.
I wonder if they're AI.
Yes, they're never AI. I'd say the launch of Claude Code is totally transformative. So I sat with a couple of amazing CTOs from our portfolio yesterday. They talked about how they today can do more with smaller teams than they've ever been able to do before. Now, Claude Code is the fastest growing B2B app of all time. It reached 1 billion in recurring revenue in 6 months. Nothing has ever done that before. So that's number one. Number two is Chinese open source. Today, 8 out of 10 open source AI models, 8 of the top 10 are Chinese. It's incredible. And the third, I'd say, is the ASML Mistral deal. That was really cool.
Yeah.
And so I put that up there as a really, really exciting thing. More of that.
I'm not sure I have one. Lomax, have you got one? What was the most exciting thing in tech for you?
I think, it stands out to me because in our world since 2022, we've had a huge cash constraint and exit constraint in our industry, and DPI, distributions to paid in, which is cash payments out by funds to their LPs, has been become the kind of watchword. And the Wiz exit, which I mentioned earlier in Q1 for 32 billion to Google, all cash, was just staggering to me. So it was I knew Mads would come up with a tech-driven answer to this. So I'd go up with a kind of something that I think resonates very strongly in the kind of deal side. And I just think it was such a big exit, and all that money will flow back in to venture in due course. So I think that was staggering to me.
Andrew, what would your answer be?
Well, that's a bit down on the weeds and geeky, but I did spend a number of my years in mobile land at a time before the mobile industry sort of collided with the internet pre iPhone. So I still get these newsletters and stuff, and I was interested to read that the 6G technology has moved from just sort of experimentation and the lab into the first fixed specification, which means that that's the sort of last step before we'll start to see this stuff commercially roll out. That will probably take a year or two, but 6G is expected to be up to 100 times faster than 5G. So we're talking up to one.
I assumed that it would be a Starlink product or a similar space-driven product.
I mean, it's a great question, and they're banning for 1 terabit per second for 6G. So I mean, we'll see if that ever actually in real world use happens, but that's pretty exciting.
Wow, I think most people in the UK are waiting for 3G in rural areas or even Edge in rural areas. So that would be nice. Your next question, please, Andrew.
Absolutely. Who would you nominate for the Darwin Award this year? So who has done something really horrible or stupid, either in tech or for the UK and Europe?
Surely Zuckerberg is up there, isn't he? With paying gazillions to AI developers, Meta falling on its face, the Meta worlds falling on their face. Although Lomax, you have a different perspective on Zuckerberg. I just think he's got so much money he can make all these duff moves and not be called out. But I think he's made some pretty bad calls. So I'd put him in that bucket. I think. Lomax,
I don't bet against him. I mean, I don't know. Whichever organization in the EU that you want to go for.
Yeah,
the Commission,
I was going to say the EU. Go for anyone in the EU bucket.
The ECJ, the European Parliament, any of them and all of them.
Yeah,
the whole of the European stack. Fair enough.
Yeah,
that's a lot of awards to give out.
Mads, what would you highlight?
Well, when it comes to Darwin Awards, I would say on the surface, it's kind of EF changing their policy to ship founders, sort of take, find top European technical talent and then shipping them to the US at inception seems like a bit of an act of sabotage. But then actually, taking a step back, it's in many ways it's just EF responding to incentives. And I think kind of the real failure here is that we haven't yet managed to create a European ecosystem where it is in everybody's incentives to keep them here and help them grow and build the best companies. And so that's my mission for the years ahead. That's what we got to fix.
I disagree with that one. I think they're just playing the game as it is on the field. So
I think that's what I said, right?
Yeah.
That they're
No, it
responding
is
to
what you said.
incentives.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I said. They're responding to incentives, and actually we all have a responsibility to fix it. But I would say, if you think about it, if as a continent we take all our smartest people and ship them somewhere else, that is sort of that deserves the Darwin Award, right? That is literally economic suicide.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. I did have it out with Matt, and in a pleasant way, and we agreed to disagree. But I totally get that. I totally get it. To your point, Lomax, I just think it's a totally duff move. Andrew, what would your answer be?
I'm afraid mine has got to be Rachel Reeves, who has her gun pointed squarely at our foot and is incrementally shooting off every toe before smashing up the ankle.
Do you think she's that bad? I think she's treading a very delicate line, not so badly.
No, she's taking everything we've talked about for this year. A lot, certainly in the UK, comes back to a lack of understanding of how to grow an economy and a lack of inspiring leadership on her behalf.
Interestingly, Andrew, though, in her last budget, she actually made some very, very direct changes to directly impact the tech ecosystem, which is actually the first thing that a chancellor has done for a long time.
Yeah, that is true. But I think what we're saying is it's a bit like when a company doesn't raise a round fast enough and says, well, that company took a year to raise it and it's only taken us nearly a year. And it's like, well, you don't index yourself against the lowest common denominator. You don't, you're not doing well because you're not doing terribly and you've done slightly better. You're not doing well because you're not doing as well as you could do.
Fair. Next question, Andrew.
So there we go. I'll put it in the poster. It's fine. What was my next question? Oh, at the start of the year, during this year, what did smart people, probably including us, although we're less smart than many, get badly wrong in 2025? Next year, we'll look back at and go, that wasn't what we thought it was it?
Interesting. Mads, you got one?
Yes, I do. So smart people said that you can look at AI as the most powerful technology of all time, and you can therefore think about how to restrict your biggest adversaries from getting access to the best AI. And following that logic, the Biden administration said, well, we're going to restrict China's ability to create AI by restricting their access to the best GPUs. And it turned out that they just found other ways to repurpose other GPUs and were incredibly efficient and now have created 8 of the top 10 open source models. And the models are frighteningly good and almost as good as the frontier models, although they have been cheaper to develop and have been developed on less capable hardware. So I'd say if ever there were unintended consequences, it seems that this was one of them.
And also I've always assumed that they actually got the chips that they wanted and needed through Singapore, through other territories and in other ways, right? So not only were they building homegrown silicon. Yeah, but it's not like they didn't have access. And I always wonder how much like restricting H200s, or I know that's been reversed, but what that really meant. It just feels like, if you really, really want to get what you need, there's probably a way to do it. And I don't think we'll ever know the truth of what happened behind the closed doors. Lomax, what would be yours?
I think people thought the AI bubble would burst this year. Many smart people thought that, including I predicted. I know we're not doing predictions, but I thought that an Nvidia earnings miss might trigger a huge drawdown, but it didn't happen. So that's the wrong prediction for the year.
Mine would be, I think, this is probably one of yours, Lomax, about how many investors have piled into defense, not really understanding defense, a bit like we saw from blockchain to AI. It feels like that AI to defense. I know there's obviously a massive blur in there, but I'm wondering how many will lose their shirts trying to get into defense resilience. I think that would be.
But this always happens in venture. You'd hope that no one's stupid enough to lose their shirt because, the nature of a venture portfolio is that you have, 20, 30, 40 companies, depending on what your strategy is, or maybe more. But yes, there will be some blood on the carpet.
There will be.
I don't know if there'll be shirt losing.
Blood on the dance floor.
You have to be really stupid be really stupid to YOLO your way into a new category that you don't understand and then over-index on that, in your portfolio.
But that's exactly what investors do all the time.
Yeah, but Andrew, there are investors and there are investors, aren't they? I've been looking
for
at
sure.
the GFC, and then obviously the previous kind of boom 2020 21, that kind of crazy ZERPy time, and there was a lot of VCs that weren't VCs, a lot of venture activity that wasn't venture activity really. So maybe it's a slightly smarter audience. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, the power law in VC still exists, right? We're a function of the underlying assets we invest in. So it depends what you mean by losing your shirt, Lomax, because there'll be plenty of VCs that don't have stellar returns. Hence why many VCs, VC asset class is still classed as high risk. What would my answer be? Too many to choose from, I think, but I'm going to be bold and say LLMs.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say it. Go on, unpack it. Go on.
Because there's no question that in day-to-day, they're exceptionally useful. So they are already transforming the way we work, and they're going to do much more. But I do feel that LLMs are the equivalent of dial-up. And I think very rapidly, we're going to see another technology is going to come out, which is going to step change accuracy, context understanding. We've talked about this before, but it's something more than glorified pattern recognition on language. This is the preamble. And consequently to that, I think whoever said a lot of people are going to lose their shirts are absolutely right.
There's a lot of money against that trade, Andrew, but yeah, doesn't mean it's right or wrong.
Yeah, I would go with that. I think they're incredible scours of the internet and contextual engines to create really smart conclusions to a bunch of data. But I'm kind of with you on that. Next question, Andy Roo.
Why was this actually a good year? There you go.
We are still alive. We are still here, Andrew. We're still breathing, you misery.
I thought you were going to give us a rendition then, Dan. I thought you were going to break into song.
That comes later. That comes when I got my auto tune in the edit. Why was it? I know why this was a good year. My positive take is how much of a wake up call. Everything. My section later is all about geopolitics and kind of all of the macro that I've seen over the last year that has made me kind of wake up and smell the coffee. And I think this is such a massive wake up in so many different contexts, from crypto to Trump to China to defense to the EU. There are so many wake up calls, and I'm very positive about the European spirit and drive and desire to build a beautiful continent and beautiful nations within. I think we have absolutely been awoken. And looking at the movements like LFG and EU Inc. and what are Harry and Kitty building, Project Europe, and the positivity in the UK and across Europe with, okay, let's go for it. That has been the 2025 absolute kind of show call up in lights for me as a massive wake up. Lomax, what about for you?
Hope we got something positive after that, Lomax.
Well, no AI bubble burst. I would say there's some strength and depth to the continued build out of this AI infrastructure and ecosystem. Tangibly, concretely, I'd say Europe had 4 decacorns this year, which is like double last year. So actually, we talked before about minting number of unicorns, but decacorns for me is the new mark of success, particularly because decacorns tend to drive top decile venture returns. And a lot of people in Europe keep talking about how European venture is consistent and or better than US venture, which it is at a cohort level. It's not in the top decile. The difference is marked, and you need decacorns to drive top decile venture returns. So that's absolutely critical. So the numbers are not necessarily statistically significant, but they've at least doubled from last year. And the 4 decacorns newly minted this year are Helsing Trade Republic this week, Aura Ring, and Mistral.
Aura Ring's an unusual one. Anyway, I don't want to rabbit hole there. Don't let me rabbit hole.
Aura Ring's gone from $500 million of revenue to $1 billion of revenue, so it's pretty.
Yeah. And I've got 2 of the buggers. It's just a really interesting notion that it's a decacorn. It's a ring. It's a health ring. It's like it's. Anyway, I don't want to go there. Mads, what would yours be?
I'd say that despite all the global trade wars and all the mess and all the noise, founders have kept building great companies. Lomax talked about some of the decacorns. There's been some amazing funding rounds for great companies in Europe. We saw Mistral were a little bit written off at the start of the year. They've really come back roaring. I thought that funding round they did with ASML was great. We've seen Revolut raise another round here in July, Nscale a big round, Helsing. and Isomorphic Labs. So just between those five, that's nearly 7 billion into 5 companies. And I think, European founders are keeping building and capital's flowing, and that's been a great thing to see.
Yeah, nice. Andrew, answer your own question and give us a positive answer, you bugger.
God, you're a harsh task mistress. 2025 was the year that VC woke back up to deep tech, to its roots, where VC started back in things like Genentech and Cisco early on. And I think this is critical because most of the big problems in society, or many of the big problems, involve the physical world, and so they involve physical goods. Depending on how you define deep tech, but the people are becoming unallergic to hardware. I think deep tech investing has doubled, nearly 2.8 or 2x, depending on which numbers you look at in terms of aggregate money that's gone into deep tech. And, late stage SaaS has taken a drop of up to 40% investing in investment capital. So I think, that's very positive for me, because I just think we're solving bigger, more important problems than the next, agentic agent management platform for the B2B SaaS, blah, de, blah, de, blah, which I don't care about.
I like that. I think that's cool. I think the hardware angle is very interesting. On the Cisco side, Mads, you'll know this. Am I right in saying that they've only just got back to their .com share price this week or something crazy like that? Is that true?
Yeah, this month I think it is. Yeah.
That's a 25-year return to grace. Bless them.
It's all about timing in the market, Dan.
Yeah, there we go. Timing and luck, baby. I'm gonna kick off my section for 2025 and discuss the more macro geopolitics. I know often we get told off for talking about politics on this pod, but I think it's really important. It does massively affect our industry, how much money's coming in, and all of the decisions that are made at a political level. And obviously the macro geopolitics side is the big picture that sits on top of what Labour gets up to in the UK. So the context that I would give my section is living in a trustless society. It feels like 25 has been the banner year for breaking trust between nations and organizations, and perhaps in some instances all the way down to people. And I've broken that down into 5 subsections that have really caught my eye this year consistently across this podcast. One is the ascent of China, how badly Europe has been exposed. I've been watching the year of the grift under the Trump administration and Trump coins and all of the stuff that he and his family are up to. The UK, I think, is a tale of two cities, as in there's been some, no growth. It's been pretty disastrous, but I'd like to look at the UK. And then war and conflict was number 5 on my list. So on the ascent of China, China has already ascended. It's already there, to Mads's point from earlier. They've got $1 trillion trade surplus, which is growing, predicted to be between 1.2 and 1.3 this year, or in 26. Open source AI models out of this world. Mads, I know you're going to dig into that in your section. Dark factories. We're looking at Xiaomi, Foxconn, and Midea. What's going on automation in factories in China is just mind-blowing. Germany being exposed in Europe. So this whole Europe exposed notion. German manufacturing, it hasn't collapsed, but it's in a really, really precarious state. We're still talking about meaningful news on deeper single markets, 28th regime, capital markets union, energy and permitting changes, and nothing really has moved because of how the EU is governed, which then creates the question as to what is tech sovereignty and what's meaningful to us. And I include the UK and Europe on that. And then I've said this before, but Trump and the Trump coin, just as an example, that's paying for favor by buying his cryptocurrency, and the Trump immediate family being 3 billion richer this year on estimate. But it's like, this is just nuts. This is a whole new trustless world. So they were the macro pieces. And my questions for let me give you the first question that I had on my mind is, and I think Lomax, you might have already stated your position on this, but is globalization dead, or is it just on hiatus? What do we think?
I think it is dead, and I think it's very difficult to overturn these trends once they start. So I think.
Do you not think we'll just get new friends? Do you not think we'll just pair up? I've seen the EU doing deals across LATAM, obviously down in the Oz news. I forgot what that area is called, but it looks like there's new trade relations being built. Do you think that they're too marginal?
No, you've got the 3 biggest blocks in the world. You've got the EU, the US, and China, and have become increasingly siloed in their activities and continue to to do that. And politically, many European nations are heading in the direction of the US. China, we know, has already been hugely siloed. So I don't see it changing anytime soon, honestly.
Mads, what do you reckon?
I don't know if it's so black and white. Of course, we'll keep trading across the world, but clearly globalization started reversing sort of 6-7 years ago, where global trade peaked. And we are going to have to think more critically about who our real friends are and who we can rely on, and where we need to be more cautious about relying on supply lines and supply chains and people we import from that maybe have other interests than we do. That's clear.
Andrew, any thoughts on that? Is globalization over?
You said something at the beginning, which was about how we don't have friends anymore, or the year that friendship died. I'm not sure if that's the right framing. I'd argue that pretense died. I think when you look at how nations were behaving before, a lot of the behaviors existed. They just weren't acknowledged. So, you had lots of grey zone actions kind of laundered through ambiguity, I suppose, rather than those same actions are happening now, but they're either openly tolerated or they're flagged. And that sort of rather naive diplomatic language that leaders were always expected to adhere to is being completely upturned by Trump. And that may not necessarily be a bad thing, because so many people have been saying one thing and doing another for so long that tech dependencies were sort of treated as accidental or ignored, whereas now they're being talked about, realized, unashamedly recognized that, and publicly discussed. It's okay now to question, do we want to be dependent upon the US? But they're also being weaponized by people between countries. So I think we may have just sort of ripped the naivety cover off a little bit, and
so diplomacy has shifted. Is that what you're saying? So basically, we've ripped up the diplomatics rule book.
Yeah, and I don't think that necessarily the trade is always a good barometer for how good or bad relationships are between countries. I mean, you can go back to the mid 30s, and the UK was still sending Rolls-Royce engines that were best in class at the time to Germany, and they ended up in the early prototypes of the Messerschmitt 109 and the Junkers GU87, right? And that's insane when it was already clear that Germany was, at least to many people, that they're on the warpath. A lot of people always flag trade as being, well, we won't have a war with them because we're trading with them. But actually, you'll trade until you don't. And so we have to be very careful about how we use that as a measure of success or failure in peacekeeping.
One thing that has been on my mind, and I don't know if anyone has any reflections on this, is staying on the kind of the World War II Germany piece, is from my history at school. I remember how Germany had to go to war because they'd built their economy on a Ponzi scheme. And I don't remember the full details here. Maybe one of you will remember a bit more, but it looked like they had no choice but to go and invade other countries so that they could raid their natural resources. And it feels like Trump and Venezuela is part of that, and maybe even Trump Iran is going to be part of that, where with such a massive deficit and such massive kind of financial issues that they have no choice but to move out of trade, which I think, Andrew, many moons ago, you saying something like, trade is the replacement for war or something along those lines. But I'm wondering behind the scenes if maybe, they have to go and invade other countries because they're in such dire straits. Does that?
I've got pretty strong views on that. No, I completely disagree. I of course they have good choices, but right. I mean, so we've seen various wars, right? We saw the Iraq War, and of course some of these are completely silly. But you always have a choice, and of course they have a choice. I think the challenge we have is the thing we really see now is that the democratic capitalist model has got a lot of strengths, but it also has real weaknesses. And one of the challenges we have is we have the ever spiraling deficits, and it is hard for us to cut back. Right, so sometimes you can get to a point. Argentina got there where it gets so bad that you get somebody in who actually does, take the machete to the deficits and start
the chainsaw.
Yeah, if you will. But we just have not been able to do that, and politicians are incentivized to keep offering more and more to people. Welfare with one hand and tax cuts with the other hand. Well, what's going to pay for stuff, and the deficits are just forever rising. And in the UK, we've seen the opposite. We've seen welfare go up and the tax burden also go up, and we now have the highest tax burden since the Second World War. But I think sort of saying that means that the countries are forced to go to war. I think it's just that logic I don't buy at all. We're producing much more than we did 10, 20, 30 years ago. Right? It's just that spending has gone out of control.
The trade one's a fascinating debate. I mean, I think trade drives legislation to ease trade and drives political integration. When you look back at how Europe started. So, but I don't think ultimately it doesn't prevent war. You trade until you don't.
I want to bring this back to us and our ecosystem and founding and investing and all the good stuff. What will a trustless world mean, or a globally decoupled world mean for investing and founders? Anyone got any thoughts on that?
I keep thinking you say trustless. And I'm like, isn't she already gone? She's
same,
not back, is she?
No, I think she's working her way back, actually. Everything I see, I can't believe she's still in the news cycle. I was like, how the heck is this happening? But yeah, same.
Look, first of all, the macro geopolitical stuff is important, but it's also not important when you're in the weeds in the micro level building companies. So at some point, it's none of this really stuff matters. But let's try and draw a line from where it does matter. I think there is now an increased emphasis, as we've talked about before, on sovereignty, building sovereign capabilities across a whole range of different areas and verticals within the economy, which means, therefore, founders in Europe, for example, who want to work on areas targeting, sovereign ownership of energy, defense, AI, critical areas, have a huge opportunity to do that. Because actually it's a once in a generation time where before a lot of the US companies could come in and fill the gap here. And actually, if we are looking to build companies like Helsing or Mistral, Lovable, etc., these companies can be built in Europe. And that's one signal and one line that you can draw from this geopolitical discussion down to the startup.
Mads, you're a deep thinker on these topics. Is there anything that you would kind of highlight around? I mean, listen, I know whatever, software is global, money is global, everything is from everywhere, but what would a trustless world look and feel like for us in 26?
I mean, your question rests on the premise that we have a trustless world, which I know is a term that you like. I don't think we have a trustless world. I think we have a world that's less naive and where we have to be more realistic about who are our very closest friends and our not quite so close friends, etc. I think we could do business with a lot more people than we think, and that's what we should do. We should just be eyes wide open. And
yeah,
I do think, but I just kind of keep coming back to, I think we've got natural allies on our European continent. That's our backyard. This is where we should start. That's where everything begins and ends. We will never see a prosperous United Kingdom if Germany and France and Italy, the countries around it, are not prosperous. So let's help each other be as prosperous as we can be. I think that's the obvious place to start. And then with everybody else, it's trust but verify, right? It's like they have their interest and we have ours, and we just shouldn't be naive about it.
Yeah, but Mads, I buy that, and I trust you on these topics, as you know. But you can't be dealing with like the Trump administration, who does whatever the tech sovereign deal was, and then all of a sudden change their mind. That is a break in trust, and I don't know.
I'd just be very careful, Dan, in over-indexing too much on Trump. We've got midterms next year. I don't think
the world we're living in, Lomax. I mean, not only is it the US, which is a massive trading partner and security partner and ally, etc., but he sets the tone, right? He is setting the tone
for the next year. That's it.
But this falls into a little bit for me, the sort of naive rhetoric that we'd love to bathe in, certainly, especially in the UK over the last 30, 40 years of this special relationship with the US. It's often been grossly naive, like the US will look after itself. I cringe when I watch this rolled out too much by leaders to sort of try and patch up their failings to do a good deal, or when they go with their begging bowl to the US. And in many ways, France's cantankerous relationship with the US is a far more realpolitik one. We only get to negotiate if we are in a position of strength.
You're like Hugh Grant, aren't you, in Love Actually?
It's just
when he has a pop of Billy Bob Thornton.
It's just grossly naive.
We are not friends anymore.
It's just embarrassing. There are going to be things we align on. There are going to be things we're not, and we need to make sure that we sometimes stand up, be it to European neighbours or to US, because otherwise we get walked over, and we don't hold our own cards so that we can deal well and have leverage on the things we want from other players.
Well, we are going to get out of tricky waters, politics, geopolitics, and the like, and move into AI Corner. Mads Doodles, what was 25 known for in AI? And I think this is a 3-part podcast on its own.
AI Corner, the year in AI. I mean, let's go back kind of exactly to 1 year ago, which was the Christmas ambush, because December 26, 2024, while everybody, at least in the West, were tucking into their Christmas dinners, nobody noticed that DeepSeek, which was for most people, unknown Chinese AI lab, released V3 of their model. And it was a really, really good model. And nobody paid any attention, except for people in the ecosystem that started saying, look, this is actually really cool. And then about a month later, on the 20th of January, they dropped their reasoning model, R1. That was the same month as Trump's inauguration. And for some reason, that is when everything took off. Within a week, that was #1 app in the US. And a few days later, NVIDIA loses 17% market cap in a single day. So it was nearly $600 billion wiped out, the biggest one-day loss in U.S. stock market history. And so that really set the tone for 2025. The other major piece around model wars was around Anthropic. At the top of the show, we talked about Claude Code, which was released in a research preview back in February. And then it went GA, kind of generally available in May. And from May to November, Claude Code grew from 0 to $1 billion in ARR. So 6 months. Okay, we've never seen anything like it. You can use it for coding, but yeah, you can use it for a lot more stuff. It's just you've got agents on tap there, and you can spin up sub-agents and research agents and writing agents and all kinds of agents to do all kinds of cool stuff. Part of that is what then went on to power Anthropic company-wide. They went from $1 billion of ARR in January back to $5 billion by September. GPT-5 was released this summer. It matched it for about 5 minutes, and then Anthropic pulled ahead again. There are talks now about Anthropic IPOing in 2026. Incredibly exciting. We're going to return to that in the next episode. The final piece I would mention around these big model wars is the Google comeback. So 3 years ago, November 30th, 2022, OpenAI released ChatGPT, and it really took the Google team by surprise. And shortly thereafter, there was a code red inside Google, and it's like, what are we going to do? All hands back into the lab, all hands on deck, even the founders back in the lab. Now, 3 years later, fast forward November 2025, so exactly 3 years later, Google releases Gemini 3, and it is so good. Now, it's trained entirely on Google's own TPUs, no NVIDIA dependency there. It's beating OpenAI on 19 out of 20 benchmarks. So in so many ways, we've seen a reversal of the roles here. Really, really exciting. The second segment is China open source. We've already talked a bit about it. We know that a couple of years ago, actually in October 2022, so 2 months before ChatGPT was released, Biden's administration banned the export of A100s and H100s, kind of these powerful NVIDIA GPUs to China. So then China only had cut down GPUs. They couldn't compete head to head. So they changed the game. And while Western labs were burning billions developing closed models, China went all out on open source. Now, initially, Meta was the leader with their Llama model. And Zuck, he spent billions trying to maintain that lead. But he couldn't keep up. By September 19th, 2024, so a little over a year ago, Qwen 2.5 overtakes Llama. So over the Chinese New Year, on Jan 20th, DeepSeek, they released the R1. Left field, okay? It takes everybody by surprise. Now, it's Chinese New Year. Everybody there takes off. 9 days later, okay, they released an absolutely state-of-the-art model, a massive counterpunch. They basically just, canceled all their holiday, took all the time off, worked 24 hours a day to get a comparable model out in 9 days. By June 16th, the Mixmax M1 model was released, 1 million tokens. It was a context and reasoning models. So it beat Claude 4 Opus on long context, longer context than any of the Anthropic models. So, again, a lot of innovation on the open source side. And then July 11th, now we're kind of halfway into the year, Kimi released the K2 model. And that was the first open source model that could compete with Claude on agentic coding, but at a tenth of the cost. So the pattern we've seen is that these Chinese labs, they're targeting specific things, whether it's context window, coding capability, agentic browsing capability, and then they're just hammering it to become the best in the world at it. And because it's open source, everybody's stealing from everybody else, everybody's learning from everybody else, and they're really leapfrogging. And they are now frighteningly close to the Western frontier labs models on overall capability. We see that in the way the models are adopted. Andreessen recently said that 80% of the startups pitching them use Chinese open source models. We've seen other similar things from other surveys. We've seen Chesky from Airbnb. He said, we use OpenAI's latest models, but typically not in production because faster and cheaper models exist. Okay, so this really just tells you how far these open source models have come over the last year. And there was sort of a bit of a wounded pride of why couldn't we do that here in Europe? To some extent, it seemed like Mistral was almost walking towards irrelevance. And by August, there were talks about Apple acquiring the whole shop, which would have been the largest European AI exit, but it would also have been kind of the closing or sort of removing of the last kind of European sovereign major lab. So the exit didn't happen. By September, there was a major investment from ASML, and that is, I think we can't overstate how important that is. And then here in December, Mistral, they released a couple of models, including one called DevStral 2, which has got incredibly strong performance on coding. So it's comparable to Anthropic's Sonnet 4.5. So that's not their top model, that's their second tier model, but it is proof that European labs can compete. But the thing is, while everybody has been focusing on LLMs, another class of models have quietly emerged, and those are the VLAs. So VLAs are vision, language, action models, and these are models that act in the world. They don't understand how the world around them is and works. It's not just text, it's spatial intelligence, and they're trained on text and vision. So Google coined the term when they released RT2 back in July 2023. And we've seen several big signals, lots of things happening at companies like Figure and Robotics and many others. We saw Jan LeCun, who is one of the godfathers of AI for people who like that term, who's been at Meta heading up their AI efforts. He's left the company to start a company that works on world models. So again, it's back to the spatial intelligence, a more globalized intelligence than just the LLMs that understand text. In many ways, 2025 has been for physical AI and robotics what 2023 was for LLMs. The true robotic autonomy is still in its infancy, but there's massive value being realized today in production in non-humanoid autonomous systems in manufacturing and logistics. And so there may be a bubble in LLMs, but in terms of VLAs, we are only just getting started.
How much of an impact will VLAs have, if you were to guess, Mads?
They will transform the 80% of our global economy that have resisted digitization up until this day. That's manufacturing, it's logistics, it's agriculture, it's construction, it's energy, it's healthcare, it's all the stuff that's out in the physical world that if all you could do is understand text, you'll never really know what to do with.
I was just going to say, I completely agree with Mads. I mean, they'll make LLMs look like stupid. They'll make LLMs look like toddlers, basically.
In many ways. And what's interesting is we think about how our humanoid intelligence has developed. And it's not like we just understand words. We have our senses. We can see, we can feel, we can hear. And we use those senses to train our brain, if we want to use that method.
Well, we understood the world before we understood language. So,
yes.
But let's just VLAs aren't going to fix like white collar work. So as in, if you think LLMs are capped in their ability to deliver productivity gains in law, for example, VLAs don't fix that, right? If you think LLMs are capped,
not in their current form.
Yep. So VLAs are coming. It's an exciting thing ahead for all of us. I'd say that the next segment is around the money. Now, AI has created more market cap than anything else in history. And just recapping the history of NVIDIA, started the year at $3 trillion in market cap. Then there was the pre-DeepSeek peak of 3.7. And then there was the big crash on Jan 27th, right? 600 bill wiped off. And then there were Liberation Day tariffs. And actually, for a company that started at 3, they fell to 2 trillion following those Liberation Day tariffs. And then they grew ever since then. July 9th, they were at 4 trillion. October 27th, they hit 5 trillion. First company ever to hit that milestone. As of today, they're worth more than AMD, Intel, Broadcom, TSMC, Micron, ASML, Qualcomm, and ARM combined. So this year has certainly been NVIDIA's year. We also saw at the start of the year, we saw Stargate announced. And I know we've almost become a little bit desensitized to it now, but at the time when people were saying we're going to put $500 billion into building these massive AI data centers, it just seemed like an almost unreal thing. Oracle, of course, were deeply in that deal, and they've actually had trouble for that more recently because of all the questions around whether they can afford to spend so much on capex, given their more meager cash flows compared to some of the proper hyperscalers.
Matt, hasn't OpenAI effectively committed to like $1 trillion in capex spend by 2030 or something crazy?
It's a massive number, and I wonder whether, when you look underneath the deals, how much of it is a true liability commitment on the balance sheet
It's
versus
not. It won't be.
we have an LOI. Sam's a pretty shrewd deal maker. Everybody's been very excited about doing business with him. Of course, there's a sense now that OpenAI has been losing their lead, and therefore people that are tied to the OpenAI bandwagon might be missing out. But I wouldn't write him off just yet.
No, it wasn't a case of writing him off. I was just wondering on a company with, I don't know. I remember watching that podcast with the chap Scott, I can't remember his surname, and he was challenging Sam Altman on this very topic. It's like, you've committed to however many trillions in capex, but you're doing like whatever 25 billion in rev. So he was trying to work out the figures from there.
Yes, indeed. And JP Morgan has been looking at the reality around return on investment, and they're saying, look, the industry needs to get to 650 billion in annual revenue from these AI models to justify.
It's about
50
now,
ROI.
probably, no?
Yeah, if you squint, it probably is. And so that's obviously a massive growth from where we are. I think it's entirely possible. I mean, you look at kind of the still limited penetration and monetization, right? You got 800 million users on OpenAI, but only 5% monetized. You switch on ads, there's a lot that can be done there. I think there are so many paths to monetization. But you think about it. We all use AI all the time. Right, and you think about how the rest of the world is going to do once we know that not everybody does that yet, but it's going to come.
No,
it's
but Matt, I mean, but we also know that there's no loyalty, right? So if OpenAI switches on ads and there's some kind of clumsy experience, people will just shift somewhere else.
Which is obviously why they haven't done it yet. Although I would say they need to get their skis on because Google is snapping at their heels.
Yeah. Well, it's great for us as consumers. Forget investors for a second. It's great for us as consumers. But
well,
I did
just
want to
ending on that note. So, kind of final AI story is from Andrew Jones over at Anthropic, who talks about the steam engines, and he said sort of the steam engines improved 20% a decade for 200 years. Now, the horses, they didn't notice for 120 of those years. And then between 1930 and 1950, 90% of them disappeared, okay? Because steam engines and other engines have become so good that you didn't need horses to do any of that.
Are you talking about humans now? Are you talking about employees?
The question is, 2025 is certainly the year where AI got real. It's not AGI and it's not the singularity, but real products, real deployments, real capability. And the question for 2026 is, are we the horses?
There we go. Boom. Loving it. Well, we are going to get into more of that on the 2nd of January. Lomax, get into health and bio and tell us what's going on, you healthy beast.
Okay, so let's do highlights for health and bio 2025. So without doubt, the health story of our time is the continued rise of GLP-1s. 1 in 8 Americans are using them, 6.5% of all US prescriptions now. Excitingly, trials are now being run to apply these drugs to areas beyond diabetes and weight loss, so to cardiometabolic disease, heart failure, kidney disease, even neurodegeneration and Alzheimer's. It's actually truly staggering, and we may look back on this period as a truly golden era. People have narrowly perhaps pigeonholed these originally in diabetes and weight loss categories, but don't forget cardiovascular disease is the biggest killer of people ahead of cancer. So actually, these GLP-1s now are applying to a broader and broader set of indications, which is very exciting. Sales continue to grow, not unsurprisingly. So this year, 62 billion in sales, up from 40 in 2023, 50 last year, and expected to double in the next 3 years to 2029 to at least $120 billion. So, sales continue on a tear. And as a reminder, given we're a European-focused podcast, this was all catalyzed by Novo Nordisk from your fair homeland, Mads. Sadly, they've had a relatively difficult year with a bunch of layoffs because they've been caught by Lilly, who've had some big readouts this year. However, I think it's generally a very, very exciting time. This year has continued the rise. They are now looking to oral formulations rather than injectables. So I think that will also be another step change. There's been huge investment activity. Pfizer bought Metsera for $10 billion this year in the space. And then I would segue this into, it's not just pharma and biotech, into D2C health. So hims and hers, which don't forget started out in sexual health, in hair loss, now is an $8 billion market cap. Share price has gone from $2 to, I think, $50 in the last couple of years, driven largely by distribution of GLP-1s. So D2C health, which went through a big kind of boom time in 21 and then a big crash, is now starting to rise again. So I think that's sort of very interesting. In Europe, it's a bit more fragmented and a bit more difficult to do in Europe, but you have companies like Manual, like Newman, which have been effectively throwing GLP-1s down their distribution network and seeing good results. Oura Ring now valued at over 10 billion on the wearable side. And for the first time now, we're seeing these hybrid service tech health companies on the preventative side. So preventative medicine has been a thing that people have talked about for many, many years. Now we're seeing the uptake of these clinics, which are effectively allowing healthy people to monitor their health. Function Health in the US is the lighthouse company here, which has now scaled, I think, to roughly $200 million of revenue. It's last valued at $2.5 billion in a fundraise this year. So Function is a little bit like Neko Health in the UK, which you may have come across. So you go to a clinic, they run a panel of at least 100 biomarkers, then they go through the results with you. It's a few $100s a year, has clearly been hugely successful and has grown very, very fast. And we're seeing the same with Neko Health, which I think is valued at a couple of $1 billion now. Mads, you're a big fan, is that right, of Neko?
I think it's cool. I would pause on the fandom. I think Dan is
I'm
maybe
a massive
bigger
fan.
Okay.
I must say I've taken parallel blood tests and I felt that some of the scans and assessments were maybe a bit rushed and maybe not as accurate or deep as I would ideally want. But I think it's a very cool concept, and I think it will hopefully evolve to become.
It would evolve.
Even better.
It's the beginning. I mean,
it has to be seen in context.
I was chatting
it's
to
300 quid. It has to be seen in
investor.
context.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I go down to the local lab and I just do my bloods and then I just put the results into ChatGPT, which, to be honest, is an amazing way to manage your own health. Interestingly, I was chatting to a D2C health investor last night about why Function is working so well. And he said that actually they are, because if you go and get your blood test done there, it will cost you like at least $1,000, probably $2,000. But because they're bulk buying, you can get the price down to $300. And also in the US, people are more willing to spend on health. So we'll see how kind of the European story plays out. But anyway, I think it's a very, very interesting time on that side. And then I would say just moving quickly into biotech. So outside, in a way, GLP-1s are to biotech what AI is to tech, right? It's been amazing for the broader sector, but it's also sucked the oxygen out of anything that's not a GLP-1. So if you're talking of, oncology drugs or any other area outside of these areas has been very, very constrained. After the 22 correction, biotech has been in the doldrums. This year, things are starting to pick up again. So the S&P Biotech ETF XBI is up 35% this year, actually. There's been lots of M&A in the space at the sort of double-digit billion, so 10, 11, 12 billion, because a lot of the patent cliffs of existing drugs from Big Pharma are expiring. So they're now looking for the next wave of innovation, the next assets for the future. So I think it's very interesting. And on the AI for drug discovery side, this year in Silico, which is a listed AI for drug discovery company, has a drug called rentosertib, which actually this year read out a positive phase 2A result. And this is interesting because both the target and the molecule were discovered and designed using generative AI. So it makes it one of the first drug candidates to reach, mid-stage clinical evidence with that pedigree. So I think that's really cool. And on the frontier tech side, especially at DeepMind, they've made meaningful progress this year on the work they've been doing on proteins. Before they've been focused on protein folding to understand the characteristics of proteins. Now it's more focused on binding. They're learning more about that, which is very, very crucial for learning about new drug candidates. So I think that's really exciting. And one wild card I'd pull out looking back in 2025 on health and bio is the AbbVie acquisition of Gilgamesh for just over $1 billion. This is basically a psychedelics company. Very, very interesting. They had in one of their recent clinical trials, 94% remission rate for major depressive disorder. So
Ooh.
people have been very excited in the last few years around the potential application of psychedelic medicine, particularly in mental health indications. And we're now starting to see very interesting things. This is a huge acquisition by Big Pharma. And also aligned to that, J&J have a ketamine-based nasal spray called Spravato, which this year became a blockbuster drug. So actually, psychedelics has had a good year.
Interesting.
That's my
I thought
wild card.
psychedelics had died a little bit of a death, but obviously not.
Hell no.
Obviously
No. So
obviously
what
still
happened with
rocking.
psychedelics very quickly is this. There was a lot of hype around it in 21. A lot of money went into it. Then the sort of crash happened and the listed stocks and some of the private companies kind of struggled. But that money got spent on clinical trials. And we're now, so the valuations went down,
Interesting.
but the
So
actual
4
work got
years
done.
later, right?
Now we're seeing the
Interesting.
readouts of those trials. Well, Gilgamesh just happened, exit to AbbVie. You've got last year, the FDA actually turned down the use of MDMA for PTSD right at the last minute under the Biden administration. Now, RFK Jr. is more pro these medicines. There are going to be some readouts next year at phase 3. And I think you're going to see the first big approval in this area. And don't forget, this is mental health. Mental health is such a big thing now. It's probably, 20 to 25% of healthcare budgets at the moment. Not only that, it also, you have the kind of other end, like the sort of the people who can't work because of this. This is actually a huge societal issue. And people, there have been no breakthroughs in this area in the last 50 years. So
it sounds like there's some on the table.
Well, you read about SSRIs and everything, but actually these are potentially curative treatments. They're difficult because they take time to administer. They need supervision, all that kind of stuff, and they're open to abuse. But actually, if you can figure all that stuff out, the prize is worth it. We talked about GLP-1s and what they can do. And almost GLP-1s is the first longevity drug in a way, right? Which is very exciting. You've kind of got that. Then you've got like cancer, which we haven't talked about today, but then you've got mental health, huge areas, right? Anyway, that's enough from me.
Wonderful. Andy Rue, let's talk about space.
Do you want me to cover defense as well? Or should we just stick with space?
Well, listen, I don't know, you can't not, right? I mean, how do you talk about space without talking about defense?
That is very true. I mean, I think to summarize on defense, I think this is the year that modern warfare became shaped, less by generals and primes and more by founders who can ship fast and scale under fire. The primes are still important, but the defense advantage has shifted from best in class to fastest to replace. And I think that best in class technology may be more important in AI. And in, as you say, in space, because if you control space to some degree, you control planet Earth. And, space is no longer a sanctuary. It's a target. And, there've been over 150 published counter space tests and actions since, well, actually in the last 10 years, but most of them in the last 4 to 5 years. And that's just the ones we know about. So space is super important. Even Europe is now thinking, muttering about the fact that it really doesn't have its access to space sorted, much belatedly. And the UK is asleep at the wheel, having just dissolved its independent UK Space Agency and rolled it into something else. But that's another story. But yeah, space is exciting. And I think the 3 things that stand out for me are the fact that launch cadence is now, every 1.5 days globally, across the whole, anybody launching. Launches have gone up about...
Andrew, say that again. So there's a new launch every 1.5 days?
Launch cadence globally is now about every 1.5 days globally.
Is it?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
that's very interesting also. Sorry, Andrea.
No, shoot.
If you're a startup who needs to test stuff in space, you used to have to wait many, many, many months to get your stuff prepared and onto a rocket and into space. With that kind of thing happening, you can get more up there, test it, get the readout, get something out. That's very cool, no?
Absolutely. You've still got to book ahead, but you can actually at least get booked. You're not waiting 4 years. Yeah. So there is a launch capacity problem. That's why SpaceX is such a great business. There were about 220 launches last year. 2025 we'll see over 260. So we really are now seeing the trajectory of launch costs, no pun intended, go down. It's still at about $2,500, $2,700 a kilogram, but it will go down to those few $100s a kilogram, and that's almost an inevitability now. So that's very exciting. And connected to that, it's not just about global connectivity. With Starlink, you've seen Lone Star announce lunar data center missions. The first payloads are soon to go up. You've got Star Cloud. So you're seeing explicitly sort of sovereign off-planet infrastructure, which is not just edge case testing on the International Space Station. This is critical infrastructure, be it connectivity, be it surveillance, be it military, be it communications, but also now data centers. And that will ultimately reduce the cost of data centers and the impact on climate as well. So that's really exciting. And SpaceX also announced that it will try and target a launch window for Mars for an uncrewed mission in 2026.
Hang on, is that an Elon pledge? Is that we'll have self-driving cars? Okay.
Well, to be fair to the guy, he's hit some and he's missed some. So we'll see.
Well, I think we're more in the miss camp than we are in the hit camp.
You've got to respect the ambition. But I think it really feels like the year that we started planning permanent infrastructure off Earth rather than just being the domain of communications, military surveillance and experimentation. We've got a bunch of companies in our portfolio, exactly as Lomax said.
He's talking his own book
business
again.
Plan. I didn't say the name of the company, but I will. BioOrbit, for example. There you go. If I'm going to plug, I'll plug. Whose whole business plan is based on commercial service to create drugs in space. In that case, and you're seeing multiple companies doing multiple different things. So it's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, love it. Boys and girls, anything else? What have we missed? I know a lot, but what have we missed that we should have picked up on 2025? We are not doing predictions till the 2nd, so that's next.
I could do a third quick point for the space if you like.
Go, yeah.
So a third point for space is Blue Origin, and then they finally launched their New Glenn. Although with mixed results, orbit was achieved. Booster landing was a failure, I think, but that's a potential real competitor to SpaceX in heavy launch.
I thought they were just focusing on tourists. So what are they doing?
No, they're targeting to be a competitor of Elon with heavy launch.
And Branson's dead. That died
when are we going
ago,
to the? Remind us when we're going to the moon, Andrew. 28, 29, the Artemis program, right?
Yeah, well, I've actually got I've got less faith in that target date than I have in Elon's, to be honest.
Really, blimey, we can't end on a bummer. Okay, no, we need a more positive ending point, boys and girls. Who's got a happy story?
Can't you flip my stuff from earlier, which is the positives, and to put those at the end?
Yeah, of course I can.
Why was it a good year? We should put those at the
positives.
end.
I mean, look, guys, if you want positives, Lovable. Everyone's been waiting for Lovable to trip over, and they've just raised a lot more, 330 million to $6.6 billion valuation.
Doesn't mean they won't trip over.
Oh, Andrew, for fuck's sakes!
Not if you can secondary your way out of this price. It's fine.
It's all about timing.
Oh, blimey. All right, my love, so let's call it a day. Thank you so much. I will catch you for our predictions predictions session, should I say, on the 2nd.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Adding the jingles, adding the bells. Here they are. The after effects is coming in. You can't. Well, Lomax is doing it manually. The poinsettia is now out of shot. Well done, guys and girls. Catch you next week.
Bye. Bye.
Upside.